Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing The Jewish State by Theodore Herzl. I've actually done a long review that I'm pretty satisfied with over at the Stephen Heiner channel. I'll put a link to that in the description as well as a card. Today I'm actually just going to look at a small aspect of this, so this will be more of an express review, but looking at some of the social and government policies that Herzl had hoped for when he wrote The Jewish State. If you're unfamiliar with The Jewish State, let me just give a brief introduction to it, in that it was a charter that Herzl wrote as an answer to the Jewish question in Europe as to what should be done with the Jews. His idea was there should be a Jewish state, potentially in Palestine, but it could be in Argentina, it could be in other places, but a place where Jews could live on their own and put together their own laws. And he saw this as a panacea. But as I say, I talk about a lot of those points in my previous review. So here I just want to talk about some of the policies and see how well they aged. The absence of a common language might seem problematic. We can't communicate with each other in Hebrew. Who among us can confidently ask for a train ticket in Hebrew? It's quite impractical. However, this challenge can be easily overcome. Everyone can continue using their native language for their thoughts and communication. Switzerland provides a clear example of a multilingual federation. In the new country, we'll be just as diverse as we are now, and will forever hold dear the memory of the homeland we were driven out of with a sense of melancholy. We'll stop using those inadequate jargons, those ghetto languages that kept us confined like prisoners in the past. Our national teachers will address this, and the language that is most practical for everyday use will naturally become our national tongue. Our community of race is peculiar and unique because we're bound together only by our forefathers' faith. There's actually so much there to examine. Who can ask for confidently ask for a train ticket in Hebrew? It's quite impractical. Hebrew is the language of the Jewish state now, and that wasn't something that Herzl could have possibly imagined. He talks about Switzerland being a multilingual federation, but that's because Switzerland is really just broken up into places where people were already speaking those languages. Switzerland didn't say, you people will speak this language here, and you people will speak this language here. People just continue to speak whatever they spoke. And then he looks down on, he says we were driven out of with a sense of melancholy. Again, he's advocating for people to voluntarily leave. And yet he injects this, we were driven out of these places. No, you left. We'll stop using these inadequate jargons, these ghetto languages like Yiddish, these languages that have a proud tradition, that have interesting words, and he looks down on them. And then he concludes with, our community of race is peculiar and unique because we're bound together only by our forefathers' faith. And this is something I've argued before. If Herzl is arguing himself as someone who didn't really have any faith, but he says we're bound together only by our forefathers' faith, then the idea of an atheist Jew becomes incoherent, right? If Theodor Herzl, the author of The Jewish State, says that we're bound together only by our forefathers' faith, then it would seem to seem that, unlike other races, the religion of Judaism is part of the race, in a sense, more so than with other peoples. He also envisioned an equal society. Will we establish a theocracy? Absolutely not. Faith may unite us, but knowledge grants us freedom. So we will make sure that any theocratic inclinations within our priesthood remain in check. Just as we keep our professional army within the barracks, our priests will stay within their temples. Both the army and the priesthood will receive the respect they deserve for their crucial roles, but they won't be involved in the government of the state, which honors them. Interference would only create problems both externally and internally. Every man will enjoy the same freedom to believe or not believe as they do in their nationality. If individuals of different faiths and nationalities come to live among us, we will offer them honorable protection and equal treatment under the law. We've learned the value of tolerance in Europe. This isn't said with sarcasm, because the anti-Semitism seen today can only be likened to old religious intolerance in very few instances. It's primarily a movement among developed nations attempting to rid themselves of the ghosts of their own history. Now, I'm not getting into this argument here about so-called anti-Semitism. I talked about that in my original review. But I want to just look at this key sentence. First of all, he's arguing for a 19th century separation of church and state, or in this case, synagogue and state. And he's using those principles, but those are verboten in the conception of Israel as it is today. Very much, they may not say that it's a theocracy, but the religious leaders have a lot of sway, and Netanyahu currently holds the government only because of the extreme right, these religious zealots that keep his government in power. But listen to this. If individuals of different faiths and nationalities come to live among us, we will offer them honorable protection and equal treatment under the law. Remember, this man's portrait is behind Ben-Gurion when he proclaims the Jewish state on May the 15th, 1948. And these are things you can see where he was wrong, or the things that he advocated for are expressly against what Israel stands for today. And he's talking about people who would choose to come to Israel. Well, what about the people who already lived there? What about the people who were born there and lived there, their families lived there for centuries? Should they not have honorable protection and equal treatment under the law? That's something you can ask a Zionist, say, well, I believe in Theodore Herzl's vision of Palestine. And you can quote them, honorable protection and equal treatment under the law, and see how they respond. I guarantee that most Zionists, ironically enough, have never read the Jewish state. It's sometimes it's only the supporters of the Palestinians who've actually gone back and read Zionist literature and seen what is being said. Here's another hilarious one. The Jewish state is envisioned as a neutral nation. As such, it will only need a professional military force, properly equipped with all the modern tools of warfare, to maintain both internal and external order. So he doesn't give specifics, but it very much sounds like a smaller part of society, not something in which every Israeli is a reservist, ready to be called up at any time, and the state is constantly at threat of war. That is not a normal situation for any country, and as you can see, Herzl is enunciating that. The idea that you'd always have to protect or expand Israel is a crazy idea. On its face, it's a crazy idea. Here's another one. We lack a flag, but we must have one if we intend to lead many people. I propose a white flag with 7 golden stars. The white background represents our fresh start, and the stars stand for the 7 productive hours of our workday. With this flag, we will enter the promised land proudly. Now, they kept the white aspect of it, but they put the Star of David, which goes against this idea that he had of having it not be a theocracy, but being united by the faith. Okay, but you might say 7-hour workday, what is this? Well, this is a part of his socialist vision of what Israel would be, and we see this in the kibbutz and other structures, which are interesting ideas in their own way. But since, as I said, this is an expressive view, and I didn't talk about this at all in my previous review, I'll read it to you now. The standard working day will be 7 hours. This, however, doesn't mean that tasks like wood cutting, digging, stone breaking, and many others should only be carried out during 7 hours. There will still be a total of 14 hours available for labor, divided into shifts of 3.5 hours each. The structure and management of this work will resemble a military organization with commands, promotions, and a system for providing pensions, which will be explained in more detail later. A healthy individual can accomplish a significant amount of focused work in 3.5 hours. After an equally long break, during which they can rest, spend time with their family, and engage in guided education, they'll be completely ready for work once more. This type of labor can yield impressive results. Therefore, the 7-hour workday implies a total of 14 hours combined work, as it's not feasible to fit more work into a single day. I'm confident that implementing the 7-hour workday can be successful. There have been well-known attempts to do so in Belgium and England. Some forward-thinking economists who have researched the topic suggest that a 5-hour workday could be sufficient. If the 7-hour workday is proven to work effectively, it will become the legally established standard working day in our future state. So here you can see he's advocating for, I think, a very reasonable way of thinking about work, but you can see that the Jewish state is not simply a project for him about government for the Jews, but about how we're going to pay for it, how it's going to work. He also, when he thought about law and order, he didn't envision harboring criminals. As a natural consequence, it should be understood that we will extradite Jewish criminals to other states more readily than any other state. This will continue until we establish our legal system based on the same principles as those of other civilized nations. During a transitional period, we will only accept Jewish criminals after they have served their rightful sentences in other countries. However, once they have paid their dues and made amends, they'll be welcomed without any restrictions, as our criminals must also be given the opportunity for a fresh start in life. That last sentence I have no problem with, but what we find now is that Israel actually harbors many, particularly child molesters who are fleeing justice in other countries, and they found the ability to rest in Israel without fear of extradition because Israel protects its own people. And so it's an inversion of what Herzl was saying here. Herzl says, we are going to extradite Jewish criminals to other states more readily than any other state. And they've totally ignored this idea. And they said, no, we're going to protect our people more than anyone else, and we will not extradite them to face justice. And here we get to some of the predictions which I talked about in my original review, but have clearly not aged well for any number of reasons. When the Jews are settled in their own state, it's likely they'll have fewer enemies. As for those who remain in their original homelands, as prosperity weakens them and causes their numbers to dwindle, they might eventually disappear. It's important to note that the Jews, like any other nation, will always have some adversaries. However, once they establish themselves in their own land, the possibility of a diaspora recurring becomes extremely unlikely, unless a catastrophic collapse of global civilization were to occur, a scenario that should concern no one but the most misguided individuals. Our current civilization has the means to defend itself effectively. If we begin to put these plans into action, anti-Semitism would immediately and permanently cease. This would be the dawn of peace. So he envisions that the Jewish state will solve the Jewish question and the diaspora will end. But we see this to be blatantly not true. The Jewish state has been established, and more than, at least half, if not more than all Jews live outside of Israel by choice. They could come to Israel, get a free passport, get a free place to stay, but instead they choose to live outside, which underlines the lie of the Zionist argument that all Jews for 2,000 years were dreaming of Jerusalem and they were just waiting to go back. We know that David Ben Gurion, he lived in Palestine for 3 years before he even visited Jerusalem. Jerusalem's not really important to these people. They use their religion when they need to in order to make their case, and so you can't attack me for my religion. But the reality is, Israel has not served as this magnetism to end the diaspora, as Herzl says. And it's not true that when Jews are settled in their own state, they'll have fewer enemies. The Jews have more enemies now than they ever have because of what they perpetrate, what Israel perpetrates, the cruelty that they perpetrate to the Palestinians and to every single one of their neighbors. There is no country in the world that has bombed every single one of its neighbors' capitals. But Israel has. And that's the kind of neighbor they are. Is this the shining light that Herzl proposed? So the other thing that you have to see is that Herzl was proposing, even though he said we're unified by our ancient faith that he didn't believe in personally, a secular Jewish state is incoherent. And the Jewish state today is undergoing a quiet civil war, but it's not a 50-50 battle. Something like 70-30 or maybe even 80-20. And Ilan Pappé has characterized this as the battle between the state of Judea and the state of Israel. State of Judea are the religious, Zionist, settlers, crazy people. And the state of Israel, who they're crazy in their own way. These are the people who, the Tel Aviv people who are advocating for a godless secular life and it has these stars in their eyes about democracy. Both of these people are detached from reality in their own way, but they clearly do not have a coherent vision for the future of Israel. And that's a problem. And this idea of the diaspora recurring becomes extremely unlikely. The Jews were dispersed even at the time of Christ. This is very famous. You can see in the Gospels that there were Jews that were living all around different parts of the Mediterranean. There's a very famous scene at Pentecost where the Jews are being preached to in their own language, and they said, oh, we all understand it in our own native tongue, meaning they were living outside of Palestine. So this idea that Jews can only live in Palestine and it is their natural place is ahistorical, and it's not even true within the Jewish tradition. And I'm talking about the Mosaic tradition. The Talmudic tradition is an invented new aspect of Judaism that should be looked at the very least suspiciously. And we can talk about that in another review. In the meantime, if you'd like to support this channel, one of the ways you can do so is by buying a copy of the book. There's a description to it. There's a link to it in the description below. You can also send me thanks for this particular video by sending me a PayPal or buy me a coffee. There's links for that. Share this video, like, subscribe, give it to people who'd like to learn more and are actually open-minded enough to engage on this topic. If you'd like to support my work on an ongoing basis, consider Patreon or YouTube membership. That way you can get early releases to videos like this one and talk to me behind the scenes and get access to videos that are not available to the general public. Finally, if you'd like to nominate a book for the future, just go down to my Amazon wish list, go through, you'll see books that I picked both for my regular Steven Heiner channel as well as Palestine Bookshelf, and the books will be they'll indicate which channel it's for. By buying the book and sending it to me, you are effectively sponsoring that video, and I will do my best to review that book as quickly as I can, move it up in the order. As always, until next time, enjoy your reading.